So quickly about myself and Nekton. So I'm a researcher, psychologist, the founder of Austrian company Nekton. Hopefully you will be reminded by this beautiful picture here of the Dolomites here in Austria. And I did my PhD with Professor Mark Griffiths from Nottingham Trent University. So I'm specialized in player tracking, responsible gaming research, and most of the studies that I published were based or are based on actual player data. So not exclusively self-report information, but player tracking data. And here we found often very different results from pure self-report studies, like players really behaving differently in real-world environments as opposed to asking them about their behavior. So the company Nekton, which is located in Austria, is specialized in responsible gaming, soft AML, and fraud software. The player tracking solution Mentor, super, my doorbell is ringing now. I hope somebody will open it up. I can do it now. So the player tracking solution Mentor Live was developed by Nekton and sort of brainchild of myself and from the old days Mark Griffiths. And we work with about 70 plus operators all over Europe, Canada, US, and New Zealand. And I won't bother you any longer with boring introductions. I think Ian and we agreed that you can ask questions anytime, and Ian will interrupt me and present the questions to me. So what are we talking about? So yesterday I was thinking, like what kind of picture would reflect best the study and, the aim of the study. And I found this picture here. I can credit myself with this picture. I found it on the internet, and it's interruptions. So it's, forced interruptions of gameplay in online casino gambling, as opposed here to the picture, which clearly, reflects gaming. So what's the background? Impulsivity, which we know is attached to problematic gambling, can lead to loss of control and subsequently excessive gambling. We also found in previous research that pop-up messages, which inform players about their gambling, are one type of gambling tool, like messages which appear while somebody's gambling. However, there are also just 2 real-world studies out there with actual players and pop-up messages, both studies being published by myself and Mark Griffiths, and we found that very few players stopped to play when confronted with a pop-up message. So in those studies, players received a pop-up message after 1 hour of gambling, and we found that only 0.7 and 1.3% of players stopped to gamble.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello. Hello is sort of directed to me. Probably not. So, and only 4 real-world studies have dedicated themselves to cool-offs, so investigating how mandatory play breaks, like involuntary interruptions, are impacting player behavior. And all 4 of those cool-off studies have also been published by myself and Niklas Hopfgartner and Mark Griffiths. And we know, from working with the operators, that cool-offs or mandatory play breaks, whatever you want to call it, are quite popular among operators. But nobody until 2-3 years ago bothered to investigate whether those studies actually worked, whether those studies actually led to longer play breaks, or in worst case, a forced play break could even lead to somebody gambling more when they are allowed to return. And that was actually also a critic that was brought up by Alex Blasinski in one of his papers. And here I'm using mandatory play break and cool off interchangeably. And the pop-up is basically the way how the mandatory play break and the cool off is presented, introduced, notified to the player. Down here, I have badly, but I did it, cited the four and the pop-up study. And I think Ian might make that study, that PowerPoint available. And you can always email me and I will send you that PowerPoint. So experimental. So give me just one millisecond here so I can open the door here. So just a second. All right. So the experiment, what happened? Between April 17 and May 21, 2020, an experiment was set up with us together with Norsk Tipping, that's the Norwegian lottery, which also has an online casino. And during that month, players received various types of cool-offs. So all players that had been gambling for 1 hour on a day received one type, of cool-off that varied with the length as well as with the way it was presented. In total, there were 23,234 players were confronted with at least one pop-up, one cool-off during that period of time. And we also had available all the transactional data, so every single bet, every single wager, 1 month before, so from March 16 and 1 month after. And I will refer to the months when the experiment happened as the experimental period, then the months before as the pre-experimental period, the months after as the post-experimental period. And in total, we had 7 basically types of cool-offs that players were treated with, and that happened during those 34 days, the experimental period. And before basically we started, they also had a cool-off on the site, and that was just a 90-second play break, which was sort of executed after somebody had been gambling for 1 hour. So players always experienced the cool-off, and during those 34 days between April 17 and May 21, we tried out different types of cool-offs. So how did this look like? So on the right side is the English translation. A pop-up window appeared, and after players had been gambling for an hour, so you have now been playing consecutively for more than 60 minutes, and the cool-off lasted for 90 seconds, 5 minutes, or 15 minutes. So those are the 3, time periods. 90 seconds, just like they did it before, 5 minutes or 15 minutes. A control group was also assigned, and the control group was different simply with respect to that the logout button down there was not there. So no logout button. The control group's cool-off lasted 90 seconds, but no logout button. So in previous research, we found that this here, basically, so this section, the expenditure information didn't make a difference. So in the previous research, the pop-ups also were different with respect to some groups received expenditure information, others not, and we didn't find any difference. I won't go in any detail here because we really hypothesized and thought it might make a difference, but it did not. And we also found that in the previous studies that based on the same data, that players did not wager more after the cool-off, right? So because it could happen that somebody comes back, they were cut off and they had lost a lot, they are cut off, they come back, and then they gamble even more to win back their losses. That didn't happen. So that's what the experimental setup looked like. Everybody who had been gambling for 60 minutes was assigned to one of 7 groups. So 90 seconds play break, no logout button, 90 seconds play break, logout button, 5 minutes play break, logout button, and 15 minutes logout button. And then again, we split those groups into, do they receive information about their losses or not? And in the study that we're talking about now, we sort of merged those groups here, right? So we end up with 6 groups because we merged the ones who receive personalized feedback and the ones who do not into one group. So the previous study, you can, of course, find it online, free access. So no difference in the amount bet across all groups. Of course, when we assign players to the treatments, we wanted, first of all, to find out if the assignment was random. It was. The personal feedback had no additional effect, so it didn't matter whether somebody was told how much they had lost or not. And longer mandatory play breaks led to longer voluntary pauses. So what do I mean here? What we actually measured. So now you might ask yourselves, okay, what's the outcome variable, and what are you actually looking into? They all have a play break, they can't play. But what we actually measured was, after the play break was over, so the 90 seconds, 5 or 50 minutes, how long did it take until somebody started to gamble again? So how long did it take until they played the first time again? And we call it time to next session. And we found that players who were blocked for 5 minutes or 15 minutes took a much longer play break on top. However, in this study that we are talking about now, so this is the second study based on those data, we also would have wanted to find out whether players relapsed back to their old pattern. So what we have here is, first of all, we again looking at the time to the next session. So how long does it take for somebody to start gambling again? And the second, so this is basically chart A. Chart B is the percent of players who stop gambling for the rest of the day. So you cut off how many players don't continue to gamble for the rest of the day until midnight. And what we see here is we have the 4 groups: control group, the 5 minute, the 90 seconds, the 5 minute, the 15-minute play break. And on the y-axis, we see the average number of minutes after the play break until they start to gamble again. So in the control group, before the experiment, after half a minute, on average, players started to play again. During the experiment, the same, because it's the control group, it didn't change. After the experiment, the same. But if I look at the 15 minutes, play break, then I see before, because there was no the 15-minute play break, it was the 90-second play break. We have the half a minute sort of play pause. So it takes half a minute for players to start to gamble again because they experienced the 90-second play break. Then they are assigned to the 15-minute play break condition, and suddenly it takes them about 6 minutes to start to gamble again. So here we see this huge impact of a 15-minute cool off on on the play pause somebody takes after this mandatory cutoff is over. However, I see then after the experimental period here, post-experiment, when everything goes back to normal and everybody again receives the 90-second play break, we see that they basically fall back to how they behaved before. So we don't see a sustainable effect of the extended cool off post-experiment. The same holds true for the percent of players who stopped gambling. In the 15-minute play break, we see 5.8% of players stop to gamble for the remainder of the day. In post-experiment, when they are again just experiencing the 90-second play break, this number goes down to 1.7. It's a bit higher than before. It's significant, but still basically a big drop. So the main takeaway from this analysis was that the effect of the mandatory play break, if basically it goes back to normal, the 90 second, is negligible. Then what we did is we classified players based on their behavior before the experiment, and we classified them into turtles. I mean, the turtle sort of should reflect slow animal, and a rabbit, fast animal, and we call them hurried or unhurried players. And what he did is, in the pre-experimental period, we checked when somebody was blocked for 90 seconds, and everybody's blocked for 90 seconds if they play for an hour, how long does it take them to start gambling again? And if players started to gamble on average again very quickly, we called them hurried players, rabbits. And if somebody, took a longer break after being cut off, we call them unhurried players, turtles. And we wanted to find out whether, turtles reacted differently to a longer mandatory play break compared to the rabbits. And this was actually the case. So what we saw is here that, the turtles, so the unhurried players, also in the experimental period, their play pause on top of the mandatory play break was longer than compared to the rabbits. So the rabbits, were nervous. They start to play, earlier again before the experiment and also during the experiment. So even if they received like 5 or 15-minute play break. But then what we did is we compared the difference, between the play pause during the experimental period and before. And we found there is a reverse effect. And we found that relatively to their play pause that they took before the experiment, so in the 90-second period, they changed, their play pause became comparably longer. So what we saw here is that, the rabbits, the ones who are sort of stressed, they changed their behavior more, relatively more, as a consequence of, the mandatory play break compared to the turtles. So they benefited somehow more from a 5 or 15-minute play break compared to, the turtles who were slow before and, they didn't, change their behavior a lot or, as much as when they were faced with a 5-minute, 15-minute play break. So again, takeaway here, the ones who were nervous or, sort of impulsive before benefited more from a longer play break compared to the ones who were rather relaxed, and took play pauses, their play pauses were longer before from the start. Then the next analysis we performed is we wanted to find out whether it made a difference how somebody interacted with the pop-up. And as you remember, if you look at the pop-up, somebody can visit the player protection site and or they can log out or, close the browser or wait. And that's basically what the data we also had available. Of course, if somebody did nothing, they just waited, right, for the cool-off to be over. Then we knew, or we had the data points for the clicks to the on the achieve button. We knew if they closed the web browser, and we knew if they actively pressed the logout button. And don't get nervous, not more nervous than when I have to explain the chart here, but it looks more complicated than it actually is. So let's simply look here, chart A, to the very right, play break, the 15-minute play break group. And let's work ourselves from bottom to top. And again, here we have the, the outcome measure, the time to next session. So how many minutes do they wait when, after the play break has been over, after 50 minutes, start gambling again? So what we see here is the blue ones are the ones with the lowest time to next session. So they start to gamble, the earliest. And those are the ones who do nothing. So they just wait, probably watch the counter counting down from the 15 minutes, start to gamble again. It's somehow logical, right? Then the next is the red group. Those are the ones who press the achieve button. So they press the achieve button, another browser goes up, they can, read the achieve page or not, and then start to gamble again. The next group are the ones who close the browser. Of course, if you close the browser, you don't see the counter. In the background, the counter, of course, is still there, but you still have to, you don't know when you can start to gamble again. Next group. And the group which took the longest play pause after the mandatory play break was over, in this case, the 15 minutes, are the ones who log out actively. So they press this logout button and they are logged out from the online casino. Somehow logical, right? Players who did nothing, just waited for the counter to sort of go to zero, started to gamble the earliest. Players who actively logged out took the longest time, on average 17 minutes, until they gambled again. And on the right-hand side, we see for the different groups, what percent of players did what. Of course, the control group, it only takes it's 90 seconds. There is no logout button. The majority of players just wait. Then to the very right, the 15-minute play break, the majority of players log out, right? So the longer the pop-up is there, the more likely somebody logs out. So this also means, I mean, this has some impact, you know, you can explain it maybe from a human-computer interaction perspective. If there are buttons there, if there are things there, players will do it, they might get distracted, and, you know, the play break on top of the mandatory play break becomes longer. And from an achieve point of view, that's what you actually want to achieve. The longer it's there, the more likely they are wanting to do something, log out, or close the browser. Of course, operators will always be interested, does this actually impact loyalty? Okay, so now, you know, they're introducing a 15-minute play break. So everybody who's gambling for an hour, you know, is cut off for 15 minutes. Oh my God, you know, players will, you know, ultimately run away and look for another opportunity to gamble. Of course, I mean, that's a study been done with Norsk Tipping, the Norwegian monopolist online casino. I mean, who knows how it would impact, you know, an operator in another sort of environment. But at least here, we didn't see a significant impact on loyalty. And loyalty simply means the retention percent. So what we did is we computed the number of players, percent of players who still gambled post-experiment, right? So we have this month before the experimental month, month post-experiment. And we see that around 96% plus are still there. And these black bars here, those are the confidence intervals that Niklas computed based on, you know, bootstrapping. And we see they all overlap. And if two confidence intervals overlap, it means there is no statistical significance, because the likelihood of the actual, you know, observation is equally distributed across this line. So at the end of the day, what did we learn from that study? That hurried gamblers, so the rabbits, the nervous ones, experienced a greater increase in their time to next session, the longer the mandatory play break lasted. So somehow the ones who, you know, started to gamble very early again, pre-experiment, benefited more from a longer mandatory play break cool-off. Logging out during a mandatory play break led to the strongest increase in time to next session, and a 15-minute mandatory play break led to the highest proportion of gamblers logging out. So that's, you know, very much explainable with human-computer interaction, you know, UI, etc., etc. I mean, online casinos are perfect when it comes to that. So a logout button obviously made a huge difference. If this logout button wouldn't have been there, like in a control group, then players would for sure start to gamble earlier after the cool-off period is over. Most players who received a longer mandatory play break significantly changed their behavior towards pre-experimental levels. So what we also saw is once this 15-minute play break and 5-minute cool-off went away, and they switched back to the 5-minute, you know, control group cool-off without the logout window, everything went back to normal. So there was no sustainable impact. I would also not have expected it. And last but not least, there was no negative impact on player retention. So the percent of players still gambling remained the same, because the confidence intervals here are overlapping. Yeah, that's about it. Questions?
Maybe I'll go first, Michael. It's Ian Messenger here.
Yes.
Firstly, thanks for that presentation. It's always great seeing academic research in this area, because it adds weight to the findings, the discussions that we're having. From your findings, you were speaking a lot about the 15-minute play break. Mm-hmm. If you were to have a recommendation which was coming out of your research for casino operators or iGaming operations, what would that recommendation be?
If they introduced a play break or cool off, it should last for at least 15 minutes. I'm not, saying it should be triggered after, 1 hour of gambling, but play breaks shorter than 15 minutes don't lead to any, sort of on top play pause, because players just wait and, as soon as the cool off is over, they start to gamble again.
Hi, Michael. Joe from Gibraltar.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, yeah, good, thank you. So, Michael, are you saying that then, like, the long-term sustainability of call-off breaks is negligible if, like, several weeks later they just kind of revert to previous behaviour? So, call-off breaks, even if they're 15 minutes, they're only going to have a short-term effect. I mean,
such a cool-off should be like just introduced permanently. That's I think. That was just an experiment, right? They tried it out for a month and then switched back. I mean, you can't expect any sustainable effect here. It should always be, something like a responsible gambling tool that's there permanently.
Thanks.
I mean, we also published, by the way, another paper with Skill on Net, like a UK firm, and there the play break was not triggered by playing length, like the hour, but by depositing frequency. And the play break lasts for 1 hour. I mean, they do this permanently. That's like a feature. And it's triggered after players have deposited 10 times on a day. So if somebody deposits 10 times since midnight, then they are cut off for an hour. Any more questions? Was it all too complicated? Too fast?
If Lampros is still on the call, I know they had their hand up a moment ago. Lampros, would you like to ask your question?
Actually, my question was similar to the previous one. In the long term, if something was noticed on the money spent by the players, but I think it is already answered.
Yeah.
I suppose a follow-up question, Michael. I suppose a follow-up question I had, Michael, to my earlier question about this 15-minute play break. You mentioned a lot about that there was no loss of player interaction, so no impact on revenue or retention. I'm looking at our participants. I'm looking at the audience for the association. We have a lot of members in jurisdictions where there are multiple operators, both regulated, grey market, and obviously the black market still there. If you were to hypothesize, if this study was conducted in that kind of environment, based on the observations and your hypotheses, would you expect any difference in player retention?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really need to hypothesize that because I did it already. Wait, I will just pull it up. So let me just find it. So we did pretty much the same thing in the UK with an operator called Skill on Net. And they have this, I don't know what's called, Play Ocho Casino or something like that. And I will share my screen. So there, like I said before, the play break was triggered not after an hour of gambling, but after 10 consecutive deposits on a day. And here, I mean, what we did measure here is what % of players came back gambling after they were cut off for an hour. And you remember before, 95% came back gambling, right? So only 5%, whatever, stopped to gamble. And here this drops down to 30%, all right? So 70% basically stopped to gamble. So huge difference. Of course, the group is much more extreme, right? So somebody, you know, depositing 10 times on a day, that's very rare. So this is a much more extreme group than somebody, you know, playing slots for an hour, but much bigger impact. And here we actually saw a significant impact on loyalty. So the % of players who stopped to gamble was sort of a little bit bigger after this impact was introduced. I mean, not huge, but it seemed, you know, that that it had a small but significant impact on retention when they introduced this 1 hour play break. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Yeah, here 7% exactly. The difference was we did get a 7.7% decrease regarding the percentage of active players.
Hi, I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi.
I'll
Really
know
interesting.
you.
I do have, yes, I do have a question regarding this after 10 times deposits in one day. When exactly does this break start? So after the 10th deposit, or will it be stopped that the player cannot even deposit for the 10th time, or will the last deposit remain in their balance? Then it's being closed for an hour, the play break. Basically, you are asking the player to come back because there's money in their balance.
Yeah, it's like you say. I think, yeah. I mean, but of course, it can be configured in any way by the operator. So we didn't have any control over that. But yeah, it's like that. Of course, I mean, with little tweaks, like you say, right? If the deposit is actually denied, you can, you know, even control the impact, you know, more.
Okay, makes sense. I just wanted to.
Yeah, sure. But still, it's locked off. 70% didn't come back because an hour is simply very long. Of course, I mean, you can never be sure whether they continue to gamble elsewhere, right? So, I mean, because you don't have like a single customer view across all the operators. And you could potentially, I mean, that's what I would like to, in the future research, also follow it up maybe with a survey and ask players, you know, what did it after? I mean, we didn't have really good experience with asking players in the past stuff because they said things that just didn't reflect in the data at all.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Question. Maybe you don't have this data, but it would be interesting to know. What about the players who remained? So the player who continued depositing, did they deposit more in this case?
No.
So the pattern was the same. They deposited the same amount.
Yeah, they didn't deposit more. They didn't gamble more. Yeah, that's something that we looked into because that was brought up by previous research, and some researchers were really or maybe they are still, who knows, opposed to that idea because they, you know, argue that it creates craving. You know, if you really want something, they take it away from you. You might even want to have it more.
I see. Thank you.
Hi, Michael. It's Josephine. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So I'm calling from a land-based casino, and I'm trying to take whatever you have here and trying to apply it. And I just noticed something. I worked at a casino where if we saw somebody for extended play and we would ask them to leave, we didn't have like a coffee shop or anything. So they would have to actually leave the property. And very rarely did they come back. But now I work at another casino where there are multiple coffee shops and shops in the vicinity. So they just kind of step off the floor, go for a coffee. And I often see those people come back. So it's very interesting to me about, you know, adapting policy to actually ask people to leave the property and not just leave the gaming floor. I thought that was very interesting and applicable.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, that's pretty much very much related to the idea also, of having having ATMs on the casino floor, right? So, if you don't have an ATM, of course, the chance for the person to continue to gamble is lower. And then even if they have to, leave the property, you lower it. If there is nothing around, you lower it, and so on and so forth. And that's the same, for online gambling. So in one of the studies that I published last year, we found that frequent session depositing was, displayed the highest correlation with self-reported problem gambling. So those players who said, I have an issue, they most likely deposited frequently within sessions, basically chasing after the losses. But then again, depositing is made very frictionless these days, but there should probably be a little bit more friction, or some players should really be, in real time nudged, to take a break and think about whether they would like to deposit for the 5th or for the 10th time on that day. I also put my email address here, so if you, would like to chat, I mean, again, you find the studies, they are all open access, but if you would like me to send you the PowerPoint, I'm happy to do so.
It's Ian Messenger here again. Just one final question, I promise, and then I'll close out the session. Expanding on Josephine's question, which I think has a lot of potential for more research, and we should definitely speak offline. I'm just wondering, for those players that experienced the mandatory play break, who maybe weren't used to that type of environment, and I don't know whether this was covered in your fieldwork, but did the operators who participated in this study have any issues with customer complaints or adverse customer contacts from these players?
Interestingly, not. I mean, the Norwegians, okay, are a little bit, maybe special because they've been doing it for a very long time. But the other operator, like this KiloNet, they do a lot of those types of things, like a 1 hour play break. Then if you do this again, violate again, you banned for a day and things like that. And I mean, I also published a couple of studies where we combine self-report with, with actual tracking data, where we ask players, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about limits? Those kinds of things.
Thank you. Just one final call for questions before we close the session. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time this morning or this afternoon.
Thanks to everybody.
Where you are. We have been recording this webinar, so it will be available in our webinar section on our website later on today, and we will also, as we have with the Eventbrite invite, we will also have a link to Michael's research paper as well for follow-up, and Michael has kindly included his email address for any follow-ups.